All right. Welcome, everyone. We are so excited for you to be here today with us. We're going to wait just one more minute for some other folks to log in. So get comfy and we'll start shortly. All right, we see some people coming in. Welcome, Angela and Mindy and Stuart. See y'all are here and ready. I believe Journalistics Designs is Sherilyn, if I'm not mistaken. Please correct me if I'm wrong. You could use the chat to do that. We're really excited to be here with y'all today, and thank you for taking the time out. And again, we're just going to wait one more minute for some other folks to join us today. So sit tight. We'll begin in a minute. All right, it looks like we are going to get started. So welcome everyone to our Alliance webinar for August. I'm so excited to be here with you today, and I'm so excited to introduce Sarah Beth Gell, who will be giving us an awesome webinar presentation today. Before we do get started with that, I do have just a few small things to go over with y'all. So a little housekeeping. We're going to do a Q&A at the end. The Alliance webinar will be able to be viewed on YouTube, or we could also send it to you afterwards. And after our webinar is over, please feel free to fill out our survey, which is marked by this little orange icon. Great. With that being said, give me 1 second as I stop sharing my screen, and I have a few more things to go over with y'all. So all right, thank you for holding for me. Okay, so as I said, I'm joined here by Sarah Beth Gell, and we are really excited to be here with y'all today at today's American Rescue Plan Toolkit. To introduce a little bit about Sarah, Sarah is the research director for the Southern Economic Advancement Project, where she works to broaden economic power through policy research and network building across the region. She served as a policy director for a gubernatorial campaign and previously served as deputy director for the Georgia Budget and Policy Institute, where she specialized in tax policy. She founded Gell Consulting to provide consulting services to maximize the policy and advocacy impacts of national and Georgia-based nonprofits. Sarah Beth has taught at the University of Georgia, Georgia State University, and Agnes Scott College. She received a PhD in public policy through a joint program at Georgia Institute of Technology and Georgia State University. Thank you, Sarah, so much for being here with us today. And I'm going to turn the floor over to you. Take it away.
Well, thanks so much, Julia, and thank you everybody for being here today. I'm really excited to talk a little bit about the American Rescue Plan funds, and I'm going to share a slideshow as I do it. So let's see if this works. Okay. Okay, can y'all see the slideshow?
Yes, we could see it.
Great. Well, thanks so much. I really appreciate the introduction and the opportunity to talk. Just a little bit more about SEEP. We're a relatively new outfit. We started in 2019, and we do policy research, particularly in the areas of economic security, climate, and health. And we focus on 12 southeastern states. When we started in 2019, we actually decided we would focus in particularly on North Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi. And so we're really excited to be here today with nonprofits in Mississippi, because this is one of the places where we're putting most of our efforts. And one of the things we try to do is really bridge gaps. So do policy research when there's gaps, but also build networks across issue areas, between different states, between the South and national organizations, to really lift up what's happening in the South into these national policy conversations. And so during the pandemic, one of our biggest initiatives has been a coalition called South Strong. You can find more out at southstrong.org. But what this was an effort to really call for an equitable recovery and response to COVID-19. So some of our nonprofit partners came to us and said, you know, there seem to be governors in other regions that are really putting forward equitable responses to COVID-19 and principles on how we're going to recover, but we're not really seeing that uniformly across the South. And so they felt like it was a place that nonprofits could step in and really call for a focus on those most marginalized and most hurt by the pandemic. So we started South Strong to do just that. To sign on to a value statement of how we wanted to recover in the South, and really how we wanted to vision a post-pandemic South and what we could be in this region. And so there's a lot of policy resources, media and storytelling resources, and also civic engagement strategies. So how do we engage folks during a pandemic in new and creative ways? And so we have trainings that we do through that as well. Fast forward to a year into the pandemic, and the Biden administration and Congress passed the American Rescue Plan funds. And so that's what I want to talk about here today, because it's a huge opportunity for communities to really have an input on how they want their local governments to respond to the COVID crisis and recover from it in the coming years. So one of the things that really sparked our interest in working on the American Rescue Plan funds was how CARES Act funding went. So CARES Act funding was in 2020, sent billions of dollars to state and local governments to respond to the COVID crisis. And for a lot of local governments, this was something kind of new for them, that federal money would kind of just show up with few strings attached and could really be used for whatever they wanted to use it for. And so a lot of local governments just kind of put it into their budgets and filled budget gaps. But there were a few local governments that we saw that were being really innovative and really stretching the dollars to reach into communities most at need. And so we put together just this little example from here in Georgia of Waycross and Clarkston, Georgia. So they're very similar in that they have about 13,000 residents. They have about the same level of poverty in both places. And when they received the CARES Act funding, Waycross put it wholly into public safety salaries, which was an acceptable, allowable use of the funds. Clarkston, on the other hand, used it for housing grants, food assistance, childcare grants, utility help for families, internet access grant, workforce training programs, and hazard pay for city workers. And so we really saw this as an example of a community really making those dollars stretch into the communities that were being most affected by the pandemic. So the CARES Act funds came very quickly and had to be spent really quickly. And so we felt a little flat-footed on helping communities think big with these funds. So what we did in the fall of 2020 was we partnered with a tech company called Propel that has the Fresh EBT app. This is where SNAP households, food assistance households can manage their benefits through an app. And so we ran surveys asking folks, what are your major challenges? Are there any programs that are working well for you? And what would you like policymakers to know? And what we heard again and again were rent, utilities, and food were the major concerns for these homes. And so as American Rescue Plan funds came, we really took those survey results and said, I don't know if these ARP funds should just go and fill a budget hole in local governments. Maybe we should really be meeting these needs of what folks are saying in the community that they need. And so we have put together a toolkit and an ARP Assistance Team that I want to talk about today to really serve as a resource, both for nonprofits and for local governments to think big with these dollars. And so I put this up here from Mississippi Today of just kind of a broad look at how much money is coming in. And this isn't all the money. There's more. There's a lot of different pieces of ARP. There's housing dollars, nutrition dollars, health dollars. But what I'm going to focus in on are the state and local dollars that have just a lot of flexibility in what they can be used for. So $1.8 billion is going to come to the state of Mississippi to spend, but then there's also local dollars that are going to come your way. And the thing I'm going to focus in particular on is this $258 million that's coming to smaller cities. So this is places that are less than 50,000. That's a lot of places in Mississippi, right? And so again, for a lot of these smaller governments, federal funds just showing up in their bank account with very few strings attached is something kind of new, and it can be somewhat daunting of, how can I use these funds? Am I gonna get crossways with the federal government in how I use these funds? Is there gonna be an audit? And so we're really hoping that nonprofits can help local governments think about how to use these funds in some creative ways. So the U.S. Treasury is in charge of this, and they're putting out guidance to state and local governments saying what funds can be used for. So they put out kind of an initial, here's what it can be used for, and then they're going to put out a final guidance this fall. But their initial direction is that there's really 5 uses that these local governments can use it for, and they're pretty broad. So the first one is to support public health expenditures. So whether that is, putting more PPP in place, doing more COVID testing or vaccine events in your community, but really that those resources can go to directly impact the public health crisis. Number 2, and this is where we're really focused, is the negative economic impacts that are caused by the public health emergency. So that's all the families that have lost jobs or had their hours cut and lost income. Those families who are struggling to make rent or utility payments right now, struggling to put food on the family, all the small businesses that have closed. So all of those economic impacts caused by this crisis and caused by, our having to shut down to stay safe can be addressed with these local funds. If local governments have lost revenue, they can use it to backfill that revenue. If there needs to be premium pay for essential workers, which can be, your police and fire or your public health workers, for example. And then pretty broadly, water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. And so again, these are big categories, and the Treasury Department is putting out more information on what can fall into those categories. But for example, we were talking to a local government leader the other day of what he was thinking for his city. And he said, well, I think I'm probably just going to buy a couple more police cruisers with this money. So that's an allowable use. But again, we really think that communities can think a bit bigger with these dollars than just buying a few cop cars, right? And so that's where we think nonprofits can really come in and use their voice. So how communities are going to make these decisions, the process around it is kind of the first step, and that's where we are. So a lot of the communities have received the first batch of funds. They'll receive the next batch in 2022. And so right now is the critical moment when we have to decide how we're going to spend these funds. What's the process going to look like to determine how we allocate these in our local budgets? And so we really think that it's going to be 3 important elements. One is identified priorities. So a lot of times we have priorities in our communities, already. Like, we know we need more childcare slots, or we really know we need a new bus route. So those are the priorities that we've had in existence. The other is the pandemic impact. So how many small businesses have closed? How many people in our community have lost their jobs? How much learning loss has there been in our K-12 system? Is there really an overcrowding in our jobs training programs because people are coming back to reskill? And then the third is community input, really going out and asking both the community and nonprofit leaders, yourselves, on what these funds should look like as they move forward in the community. So we've put together a framework of 6 steps to tell your ARP story as a community. And the first one is just how much are you getting? And so that information is starting to flow of how much each community is getting. For a lot of communities, it kind of evens out to about $300 a resident in your community. So these are really much larger kind of chunks of change than a lot of local governments are used to getting from the federal government, and a lot more flexible. And so for some local governments, it really truly is an opportunity to do something visionary for their community. What I'm really going to focus in on today, though, is step 3 and 4 of how we're going to make the ARP spending decisions, so that process element, and how did the pandemic affect our community? Because I think that those are 2 really key steps where nonprofits can play an essential role in what's happening. So we have put together, as part of our toolkit, a model resolution, because as local governments are starting to make these decisions, we think there needs to be a framework for how decisions are going to be made. What are the principles that are really going to drive our decision making on how to spend this money? And so we have no pride of authorship here. We expect that local governments would rip this thing apart and make it their own. But we've put this together just as an example of what a model resolution could look like. And we focus in on 3 priorities. So one is that we really want these funds to drive a sustainable and equitable recovery. So we don't want to just kind of backfill what's happening in the budget, but really to use these monies in ways that get to folks who need the money the most. The second is really to commit to community engagement. An exciting part to us about the Treasury Guidance is that it says you have to get community input on these dollars. And that's particularly targeted at states and larger kind of metro cities. So they're hoping for community input at the smaller 50,000 and less population, but it's not as stringent of a requirement. And so we're hoping that those smaller places commit themselves to community input on what these ARP funds should go towards. And then finally, how do we measure success? So we really want local governments to commit to accountability and measurable outcomes. So maybe it is we commit to these funds because we want to decrease the need around childcare, or we want to commit these funds in a way that improves food security. Whatever it is, we're hoping that local governments really commit themselves to an outcome that we can then be held accountable to as we move forward with spending. And so another part of the toolkit that we've put together is what is community engagement? So a lot of particularly larger cities use community engagement year-round in their budget processes and their strategic planning, and it's really become a part of their DNA. On the other hand, a lot of smaller cities really don't have the capacity to do large community engagement efforts. And so this might be something new for them. So we've put together kind of a guide to what community engagement can look like, and then also vendors that can help with this, vendors that have survey tools or focus group and listening session tools that can help local governments think about how to get as much input as possible. So we think about it in 3 ways in particular. One is helping to identify who our existing community partners are and who else needs to be at the table. So some local governments are going about setting up task forces, and our hope is that nonprofits would have a seat at that table. So New Orleans, for example, has a number of task forces. So, there's one might be on housing, one might be on health, one might be on transportation. And nonprofits can bring a lot of expertise about community needs and opportunities to those task forces. So we really want local governments to think of nonprofits as that expert, as that advisor on what needs to happen with these funds. Second, we think there needs to be a commitment to engage hard to reach and disadvantaged community members. This is something that we've been testing out in a number of ways with groups recently. One of our biggest partners is a group called Fair Count that has done some work in Mississippi as well. And, you know, they were really, their mission was to reach hard to reach populations for the census. And so then the question became, well, how else could we use this model and these strategies around voter engagement, around vaccine outreach, and now around these ARP funds? So, you know, really building into the community engagement plan a real focus on and commitment to reaching hard to reach populations, whether that's door-to-door canvassing or particular events at churches, for example, or text banking or phone banking to really get the input of the whole community and not just the one or two people that might show up at a city council meeting. And then finally, the public at large. So how do we have those big listening sessions? Do we do surveys as a local government? How and when can the public be a part of the process? A lot of times in local government budgeting, the department heads meet and they decide what's needed. They give it to the mayor. The mayor presents it to the city council. Then there's a public input and then there's a vote. And so the public is really at the end of the process. And at that point, it's really hard to change what's in the budget. And so our goal is to get the public at the beginning of the process, where those department heads are talking and thinking about what's needed, and not at the end of the process where it's really almost to a vote. And so there's not going to be much change made. So we see nonprofits as having a number of roles, like I said. One is to really focus in on the process right now, because this is when we need people to commit to an equitable process that includes community engagement. So that's asking local elected officials, city and county managers, and budget office folks what the process is going to be for ARP funds. That might be you as the nonprofit leader, that might be your board members. That is, you know, really just asking that initial question of, hey, how are y'all going to decide how to divide up this money? And then next, once that conversation gets going, really pushing for a process that prioritizes community voice. That can be through a model resolution, that can be through community task forces, but really focusing in right now on, you know, we want a seat at the table as a nonprofit. And we really want y'all to ensure that this process is written out, that it's going to reach hard to reach populations, and it's going to include us at the table. The next is to collaborate and coordinate. So, you know, we did a study of local government budgeting and how nonprofits can have a better voice. And we highlighted a case in Buncombe County, North Carolina, right outside of Asheville, North Carolina. And they had been really successful at getting money into childcare and transportation to their bus service. And so we talked to them about how they got those asks made. And they said that they really worked hard to bring all the nonprofits together as a coalition and focus in on a very narrow agenda that said, you know what, for this chunk of money, we really have these 2 or 3 main priorities. And we're all going to come together as a nonprofit community in this local town and put this forward as our agenda. And it worked. They received the funds they were asking for, mainly because it really was every nonprofit voice in the community really sharing an agenda. And so that's where we think, since these are kind of one-time funds, that there's a real opportunity if there can be collaboration and coordination around your local nonprofits, that you can really make a big impact on what those asks are. Next is be a resource. So share good ideas with local leaders. If you hear of something great happening in another town in Mississippi or a place, you know, outside of Mississippi, share that with your local leader. What we've heard is that there's a lot of kind of fear and anxiety of, how am I allowed to use these funds? And so as much as we can share good ideas with these leaders to say, hey, Biloxi or Tupelo is using the money in this way. Have you thought about using the money in that way? As much as we can spread these good ideas, the more innovative we're going to be with them. And then y'all are the experts, right? You have deep ties to communities. You understand the needs of your clients. And so bringing that expertise to the table to really identify community needs is going to be invaluable in this process. And then finally, advocate and hold leaders accountable. So this is, a traditional advocacy campaign, letters to the editor, comments to Treasury. If you feel like your local government is not getting community engagement and input, there's going to be a process to send complaints to Treasury to say, you know what, they're not talking to us, they're not asking. Testimony at city council meetings, education for your board members so that they know this opportunity around these ARP dollars, and they know the opportunity that it can be a partnership between governments and nonprofits to spend these monies. It doesn't have to just be government programs that these monies go to, but it can truly be a partnership between nonprofits and governments so that these dollars are reaching critical needs. And so educating your board members is going to be really important so they can be another voice out in the community saying, how's this process going to work? What are the community needs? And how are we going to make sure that these funds are spent equitably? So we've built this ARP Assistance Team that really has two groups in it. One is a team that's reaching out directly to local leaders to talk about ARP, talk about this opportunity, and to guide them through the process. And the other is a team that's dedicated to nonprofits to make sure that they know about this opportunity and that they know that they can bring community voice and partnership to the local governments. So we've developed the toolkit, which I mentioned has a model resolution, a community engagement guide, how to tell your story, but then also policies that are not tied to ARP, but can complement what these ARP dollars are doing. So that's around things like evictions and economic development, transportation, utility shutoffs. And they're all designed with nonprofits and advocates in mind to say, this is how local governments, these are kind of levers of power that they have in each of these. And this is what you can ask your local government for in each of these areas. And so we're hoping that some of these policies can be put in place at the same time that these dollars are flowing out so we can have really a double impact. We have a resource hub on there where we're collecting news articles from around the nation of how folks are spending their ARP dollars, and also Treasury Guidance, National League of Cities, and other guidance on there as well. Our technical assistance team can be reached at southstrong@rooseveltinstitute.org. We're happy to have conversations with folks about what's possible in their community, what they're hearing, and to give them further assistance on a one-on-one basis. One other thing I'd like to mention is that we're having this mayor's roundtable, and we're bringing together mayors from Alabama, Georgia, and Mississippi at the end of August just to talk about how their ARP process is looking, how their community engagement processes are looking, and what really the kind of their challenges are, and share solutions across them. If you have Mississippi mayors that you really think should attend this, I would love to hear about that. So please feel free to send it to southstrong@rooseveltinstitute.org, and we will get them the invitation so that they can be a part of that conversation. And last but not least, I know this is not about vaccines. Today is not. But that's another part of our work, is that we're doing vaccine outreach in 7 southern states, really supporting vaccine outreach. So I put a link in here, and hopefully the slides will be shared with you so you can click on it, because we have free kits available that have door hangers, palm cards, t-shirts, and buttons, so that if you're doing vaccine outreach, these free kits are available for you to use in community to help spread the word and spread vaccine awareness. We also have a few mini grants available for groups in those 7 southern states that are doing vaccine outreach. So happy to talk to folks about that as well. Would love to open it up for questions. I'll see if I can stop sharing my screen. Would love to open it for any questions that y'all have to discuss this or vaccines, emergency rental assistance, anything that kind of is in that COVID crisis category. Would love to answer some questions.
And folks, you can throw the questions in the chat or in the questions tab. I'll be monitoring it. So feel free to throw those questions there.
Maybe I answered them all.
Maybe you did. Maybe you did. Let's see. Give it 10 more seconds, just in case someone's writing a really long question. You know. Well, if no one has any questions, I want to thank everyone for coming, and thank you, Sarah, for giving this amazing presentation. This was really, really helpful, and what important work that's going on. And I'm so glad we were able to share it with folks that attended today and folks that will watch this in the future. If anyone does have any questions and did not get to ask it here, please feel free to email me and I can send those over to Sarah and she will be able to answer those for you. That being said, again, thank you everyone for taking the time out today to come and to learn with us. We're so happy you were able to make it. And with that being said, I hope everyone has a beautiful rest of your day and we will talk shortly. We will see y'all soon at hopefully another webinar or training.
Thanks
and
so
thank
much,
you, Sarah, again. Absolutely, anytime. We loved having you. All right, y'all. Take care.